Gypsy Rose was a girl raised by a single mother named Dee Dee. She grew up in a small, quiet neighborhood in Missouri. She was later perceived to have been abused by her mother, who falsely claimed her daughter was suffering from many illnesses. Dee Dee suffers from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is a mental disorder that causes someone to pretend to be a caretaker for someone who isn't sick. For years, Gypsy was forced to use a wheelchair and take medications she didn't need by her mother. Gypsy eventually found out her mother's doings and planned an escape. Gypsy sneakily met someone named Nicholas Gaudijon online and started dating him behind her mother's back. Nicholas was madly in love with Gypsy. Using that to her advantage, she manipulated him to kill her mother for her, and he agreed. Gypsy's motive for killing her mother was a desire for freedom and being with Nicholas. Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee multiple times and left her body rotting for days before she was finally found.
Claudinia Blanchard was found stabbed to death. It set off a roller coaster story.
What would drive Gypsy to want to plan the murder of her own mother?
Although some may disagree that victims are fully aware of their actions, I will argue how child abuse is an important factor that should go into account of the victim's sentencing. Therefore, the victim's actions are a trauma response to what they've endured, and they shouldn't be held entirely accountable.
Children were often overlooked as being property instead of an individual with human rights. It states cases of child abuse were unheard of in the 19th century. Thus, there were no welfare agencies to handle these incidents involving child abuse. A significant event took place of Mary Ellen Wilson, who was severely abused. This took place in New York as a young girl who was adopted from an orphanage. Her adoptive mother began abusing Mary after the devastation of the adoptive husband's passing. A caseworker was assigned to Mary Ellen, who asked an attorney to plead the case, terminating the mother's parental rights. Dr. Henry Kemp discussed 2 case studies on how both young children had non-accidental and unexplained fractures and head injuries, meaning they suffered from domestic violence from their caretakers. This article exposed the reality of child abuse and provided doctors with concrete ways to identify, understand, and report suspected child abuse to authorities. It also outlined initiatives and provided a structure for the federal government to address the issue. The act included federal funding for child abuse assessments and background checks.
Child abuse can seriously affect a person's actions and should be taken into consideration in legal sentencing. Gypsy's actions are seen as a trauma response to years of physical and emotional abuse, which diminished her capability to see ways to end her suffering. The truth was that Gypsy Rose could walk, didn't need a feeding tube, and didn't have cancer. Gypsy wasn't actually unwell, and her mother had been lying about her symptoms.
Did she ever catch you walking?
She did a couple times.
And what did she say or do?
She got so upset with me, she would punish me so bad. Like, she started hitting me with a coat hanger and telling me all kinds of mean things. She would tell me that she wished she had an abortion when she had the chance.
Her daughter was, in essence, a hostage, and I think we can understand the crime that occurred subsequently in terms of a hostage trying to gain escape. Therefore, Gypsy endured trauma that affected her emotional perception to make decisions in a way that someone who wasn't abused would. It states, moreover, as childhood abuse can also affect development related to later decision-making and judgment, a defendant's capacity to make decisions and corresponding criminal responsibility may also be considered compromised. Therefore, when she took the stand at his trial, prosecutors already had cut her a deal because of the abuse she had endured. They considered the mental and emotional toll of prolonged abuse as it was an act of desperation.
Some may believe that Gypsy endured many years of abuse, but that doesn't excuse her decision to murder her mother. Victims are fully aware of their actions, so child abuse shouldn't go into account for victim sentencing.
Gypsy asked in the least manipulative way because she didn't lie at all. She put it all out there. She didn't try to do it through innuendo. She didn't make up things. She just said, "This is what's happening to me. Will you kill my mom?"
Once the murder is complete, Gypsy had a desire to hide the evidence. They took those blue latex gloves and they did go to the post office, put them in an envelope and mailed them to the defendant's residence house in Wisconsin so they don't get caught on the bus with it. Gypsy knew that the consequences she will face if the evidence was found, and she recognized that the knife would link her to the crime.
As a solution, the justice system can be changed to better differentiate criminal behavior and trauma responses from victims of child abuse. In other words, taking child abuse into consideration for sentencing is crucial to ensure justice is fair. To start off, we should ensure that judges and lawyers receive training on the psychological and emotional impacts of abuse. It states criminal justice professionals assigned to handle cases involving child victims and child witnesses should have more in-depth training.
We go behind the walls of a prison that houses some of the state's most violent offenders to see how tackling their past could change the direction of their future.
Additionally, limiting contact with the system and increasing contact with mental health professionals or other supports also improves individual outcomes and community safety. Thus, instead of punishment, focusing on rehabilitation and access to mental health professionals and support programs. Finally, as the audience spread awareness and have public reform campaigns, child advocacy centers provide a safe environment in which members of multidisciplinary teams can interview young victims and witnesses.
If child abuse is not addressed effectively, then mental and physical health issues of their experiences will be carried throughout their lives. Children who have been abused are more likely to become abusers themselves, which creates an ongoing cycle for generations that may be harder to break in the future, harming themselves and those around them. Society's inability to differentiate between someone's criminal actions and trauma responses means our justice system is corrupt. Therefore, by addressing child abuse, we are not only protecting the children, but avoiding the long-lasting consequences that can have an impact on our society.